Back to Uprising, I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. It has been 5 years since the magnitude 9 earthquake that triggered a devastating tsunami hit Fukushima, Japan. The tsunami itself swept over towns and villages, flattening 400,000 homes and buildings and killing more than 15,000 people, making it Japan's worst peacetime disaster. Because the tsunami damaged the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, it caused a major meltdown and became the world's worst nuclear catastrophe since the 1986 Chernobyl incident. My guest is Arnie Gunderson. He's just finished a one-month tour of Japan where he met with Fukushima evacuees. He sits on the board of directors of Fairwinds Energy Education. He has more than 40 years of nuclear power engineering experience. He was the recipient of a prestigious Atomic Energy Commission fellowship for his master's degree in nuclear engineering, and he holds a nuclear safety patent. He was a licensed reactor operator and former nuclear industry senior vice president. During his nuclear power industry career, Arnie Gunderson managed and coordinated projects at 70 nuclear power plants in the United States. Welcome to Uprising, Arnie.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Well, your bio obviously makes it seem like you know what you're talking about when it comes to nuclear reactors and how these things work. So let's talk about your tour through Japan first. How you were there for a month. Who did you meet, and what sorts of conversations did you have with people?
You know, there was a lot of really sad conversations. So I met with a lot of the people who were forced to leave and are now in essentially giant trailer parks. I met with the most memorable one was I met with 22 women in a 66 trailer park, and it was amazing. We were the first people in 5 years to ever talk to them about radiation.
What? I mean, does
Yeah,
that include the Japanese government?
that neither the Japanese government nor Tokyo Electric ever talked to them about radiation,
Oh my
and
goodness.
yet they're off their land. They're unable to ever return, and they know nothing. It was amazing. It was so sad. Lots of stories of the smells and the skin lesions they developed, and we had one woman who lost her hair. She had speckles all over her skin. She had a bloody nose, and and her doctor told her it was stress, and she believed it. The inhumanity of the Japanese government toward its own people is just amazing.
What did the situation look like? Did you actually go to Fukushima?
Well, I saw it from a distance.
Hmm.
We asked Tokyo Electric if I could come in, and they declined to respond. So I was about half a mile away at the closest. You know that the entire mountain range, there's a mountain range about 20 miles inland, sort of like the west coast of the U.S. You know, you've got a coastal plain, and then inland you've got a mountain range, and the entire mountain range is contaminated. We found radioactive wild boar. You know, a hunter had killed a wild boar, and we put a radiation detector on the meat, and it was pegging the scale. And then we found they have wild monkeys in their mountains, and one of the guys I was with followed a monkey and collected its droppings, and the droppings were astronomically radioactive. And I crawled out in a farmer's field and measured cow flop, and I had the same experience. So radiation is everywhere.
It's so interesting. I was looking at a study that was just done this week, a British study. A team of experts from four British universities developed a series of tests to examine the relocations after the Fukushima crisis and see if the massive amount of expense was worth the cost in terms of how many additional months or years people's lives were extended by. And what they
Hmm.
found was that the average lifespan was extended by about only 8 months in doing the relocation. And essentially, the group of researchers assessed that the cost of relocation and the fact that, many thousands of elderly people died simply from the stress of relocation, that they said it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I absolutely disagree with that. You
Mm.
know, there's for two reasons. First off, there's the fact that the cost is borne by Tokyo Electric, and the risk is borne by the 100,000 people who have to leave. So, I don't see any Tokyo
Good
Electric
point.
executives bringing their people, bringing their families in for cheap real estate. But the more important thing is that all of these studies are grossly underestimating the risk, and they're using this model that's based on a 30-year-old man who was exposed to a burst of radiation from an A bomb. And all of the models go back to that. But women and children are 20 times more radiosensitive. So even if you accept that 8-month life increase for 150,000 people, that's a lot. But then if you say, well, half of them were women and another quarter were children. So the actual life extension, if you will, to my way of thinking, is astronomical.
And also, it's an average, right? So there are individuals who might get, cancer when they ordinarily might not have and die earlier. And so at an individual level, the cost between, dying 10, 20 years before you should from cancer versus not is pretty significant too.
No, you're absolutely right. We had a lot of cases where people told us that their doctors were covering up the radiation symptoms. We had one doctor come forward and say that whenever he diagnosed a patient with a radiation-related illness, the Japanese government refused to pay his bill.
Wow.
And they put him out of business. So with that kind of pressure on the medical community, it's hard to get good epidemiological data about what these people are getting ill from.
So if you want to stay in business as a doctor, you basically have to underdiagnose or misdiagnose radiation-related illnesses. Wow.
Yes. Like that woman I told you, her hair is falling out, she's got a bloody nose, etc. And they're telling her it's stress. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not. So you're absolutely right. The pressure on the medical community is astronomical to downplay the significance of this.
I was reading a part of a report that you wrote describing walls of black plastic bags containing highly toxic radioactive waste have been left in fields, along highways, and beside country roads without plans for permanent disposal. This just I've not heard this anywhere else. Tell us about this.
Oh, geez, it's amazing. They have 30 million bags. And these aren't the bag you take out to your trash. Each one of these bags weighs a ton. So they've got 30 million bags of radioactive material.
So in terms of say soil that they kind of confiscated or?
Yes. A lot of it is, they're hand scrubbing rocks and collecting the material that they get off the rocks. They're going through lawn clippings and people's roofs and stuff like that.
Also, what, like contaminated clothes that people are
Yes.
using?
Contaminated clothes, contaminated biological material, whether it's trees. Some of the trees were so contaminated, they were afraid that in the event of a fire, they would go airborne. All that radiation would go airborne. So they just cut the trees down and ground them up, and sooner or later they're going to figure out something to do with all this radioactive material.
And so let's also talk about the fact that Japan is going to be hosting the 2020 Olympics. This is going to be, of course, in Tokyo, not Fukushima. But does the Japanese government really fear that any kind of realistic assessment of the impacts of Fukushima will, in turn, have a bearing on their reputation as a host of the Olympics, at the very least?
Well, hosting the Olympics was certainly a marketing ploy to take people's minds off of the disaster. You might recall that back in 2011, 2012, Prime Minister Abe was saying that the radiation was contained and everything was under control. And based on his assurances, the Olympic Committee gave Japan the Summer Olympics. But that was a marketing ploy. If you just looked at, here's the New York Times and Reuters and on the anniversary of the accident, saying that this is not under control. So he said what he needed to say to get the Olympics, and I think they're hoping that people's minds will be taken off the disaster.
So, Arnie, let's talk about the lessons for the United States. Climate change, we know, is escalating. In fact, there's a new NASA report this week. I mean, we're seeing every indication that climate change is happening even faster than scientists predicted. What this, of course, does is it creates disruptive climate that makes existing nuclear reactors, even ones that may not be active, very vulnerable, even more vulnerable. Just as the Fukushima Daiichi power plant was vulnerable to a tsunami, that aren't we going to be seeing or having greater likelihood of severe climate patterns risking our nuclear plants here in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great observation. When engineers go back over the weather-related records, they go back maybe 100 years and they say, well, the worst flood was, and the worst hurricane was and the worst, whatever the natural phenomenon was, is based on the last 100 years of data. But in the last 10 years, you can throw all that data out the window. There's a couple of plants that come to mind. The one in New Jersey, which is Hope Creek, I'm sorry, Oyster Creek, rather. That's the one that Sandy hit. And they were within 6 inches of flooding the cooling pumps that they thought had been protected from a 1,000-year event. So these 1,000-year events keep coming at a much more increased frequency than you'd ever expect. Another one's down in Florida. It's Turkey Point. It got hit by a tornado about a decade ago, and all of the offsite communications were lost for 3 months. So yes, climate change is jeopardizing nuclear plants around the country and around the world.
And so what needs to happen now? Are people paying attention to the lessons from Fukushima, particularly given that the Japanese government is trying to downplay it so much? It seems as though, when people like yourself are speaking out about what is really happening in Fukushima, you are often written off as a conspiracy theorist. All the like the study that I mentioned, there have been so many studies sort of downplaying the impacts of Fukushima, so that people who are speaking up like yourself appear to be exaggerating.
There's so much money on the other side of this argument. I think we have the people on one side and the moneyed interests on the other. The banks in Japan have been doling out billions and billions of dollars to keep the 50 nuclear plants that are still potentially viable, keep their employees on the payroll for 5 years. What business would do that unless they knew they were going to get their money back? You wouldn't open a grocery store and then say, "Hey guys, I'm going to pay you all for the next 5 years, even though we have no customers." Well, the Japanese banks are behind a lot of these issues because they've given the money away, anticipating that sooner or later these plants are going to start back up. Where did they get that promise from? They got that promise from the Japanese government. I think the inhumanity of the Japanese government toward its own people has just been appalling.
Well, where can people find out more information? Can you give out the website for the Fairewinds Energy Education Organization?
Yeah, thank you. It's Fairewinds, Fairewinds. It's the old English spelling. Fairewinds.org. And we have a great website. Something like 11 million people have visited it. And we are the go-to source in Japan as well.
Really?
For reliable information. We're the biggest website in Japan for reliable information.
And we'll post a link to that from uprisingwithsonali.com later today. Arnie, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
My guest is Arnie Gunderson. He sits on the board of directors of Fairewinds Energy Education. He has more than 40 years of nuclear power engineering experience and has managed and coordinated projects at 70 nuclear power plants in the United States. He just finished a 1-month tour of Japan. This is Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. Anna Bus is our assistant producer. Our theme music is by Quetzal. You can like us at facebook.com/uprisingradio and follow us at twitter.com/uprisingradio. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. If you're a listener to our Southern California station KPFK and would like to listen to Uprising with Sonali 5 days a week, simply tune in to kpfa.org in the 8 to 9 a.m. hour and listen to the live stream. This program airs Mondays and Tuesdays on KPFK and Monday through Friday on KPFA. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host, audio engineer, and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. It has been 5 years since the magnitude 9 earthquake that triggered a devastating tsunami hit Fukushima, Japan. The tsunami itself swept over towns and villages, flattening 400,000 homes and buildings and killing more than 15,000 people, making it Japan's worst peacetime disaster. Because the tsunami damaged the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, it caused a major meltdown and became the world's worst nuclear catastrophe since the 1986 Chernobyl incident. My guest is Arnie Gunderson. He's just finished a 1-month tour of Japan where he met with Fukushima evacuees. He sits on the board of directors of Fairewinds Energy Education. He has more than 40 years of nuclear power engineering experience. He was the recipient of a prestigious Atomic Energy Commission fellowship for his master's degree in nuclear engineering, and he holds a nuclear safety patent. He was a licensed reactor operator and former nuclear industry senior vice president. During his nuclear power industry career, Arnie Gunderson managed and coordinated projects projects at 70 nuclear power plants in the United States. Welcome to Uprising, Arnie.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Well, your bio obviously makes it seem like you know what you're talking about when it comes to nuclear reactors and how these things work. So let's talk about your tour through Japan first. How you were there for a month. Who did you meet, and what sorts of conversations did you have with people?
There was a lot of really sad conversations. So I met with a lot of the people who were forced to leave and are now in essentially giant trailer parks. Um, I met with the most memorable one was I met with 22 women in a 66 um, trailer park, and it was amazing. We were the first people in 5 years to ever talk to them about radiation. I
What?
mean,
I mean, does
yeah,
that include the Japanese government?
that neither the Japanese government nor Tokyo Electric ever talked to them